Thank you for joining the Resilient Cyber Podcast. My name is Chris Hughes, along with my co-host, Dr. Nikki Robinson.
Hey, everybody.
And today we're joined by Scott Piper. Scott, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to chat, man. We've never really chatted live like this, despite chatting in comments and messages for quite a while. I've been following your cloud security content, like I said, several years at least. I don't know how long. I've been doing cloud security since like 2015 or so. And I don't know when I first came across you, but it's been some years now. But for folks that don't know you, haven't read anything you've put out or used any tools you've talked about or been to a conference you helped organize and all the other things we'll talk about, who is Scott Piper and what are you up to?
So I work at Wiz these days, which is a cloud security vendor. But I'd started roughly around the same time you had, around 2015, 2016, something like that. I'd started up a consulting business where I was focused on helping companies with their AWS security. And so it was through that I really I think at the time, I tried to focus on just trying to help as many companies as possible. And so I was able to make a bit of a name for myself through that. So I built some open source tools like CloudMapper, Cloud Tracker, built flaws.cloud, which is an online free training for people, wrote a number of blog postings and things. And then more recently in the past few years, started up a conference called Forward CloudSec with a number of other people. So was lucky to be one of the founding members for that.
Yeah, it's funny, as you were saying some of the tools, I was like, man, I forgot about that one. Because like I said, it's been some time and I've come across quite a few things that you've put out. And like the training tool, for example, now I see like all these GOAT versions of,
Yep.
code, like all these different, vulnerable environments and tools to learn and train on, which is cool to see it evolve. So I wanted to ask you first off, like you said, you've been doing cloud security for, quite a number of years at this point, almost a decade. What are some things that you think have improved quite a bit? And what do you think that, what are some things you think, wow, we got quite a ways to go on this, despite knowing it's been a problem for some time?
Yeah, so in terms of improvements, there's been things like on the cloud vendor side. I mean, when the cloud vendors cloud service providers were first starting up, AWS, GCP, Azure, like they were just trying to put out like bare bones functionality. It was a lot of what even today some people still think the cloud is, where some people still think the cloud is only getting access to a VM in the cloud, your own server there. They think it's only getting access to some storage, but like now it's so many different services. I think AWS at this point has over 200 different services available, so there's so many different things. But when it first started out, like with there only being storage available, like that meant that, okay, some people want to make some of that storage like publicly available in some way. So like an S3 bucket has functionality in it to make it public. And that was very easy to do because that was like, some of the basic functionality that people wanted. Nowadays, there are ways of doing that more securely and better, by putting, CDNs in front of it, like AWS's CloudFront to put in front of an S3 bucket. But when that first started out, like AWS made it very easy to make an S3 bucket public, and that caused a number of issues for a number of companies. So nowadays, it's much more difficult to make those S3 buckets public. AWS has put in like a number of features where it's really like you have to undo some things in order to be able to do that these days. So I think that that's one side of things is how people use the cloud, knowing kind of what mistakes people might make, like those have been figured out. And then related to that, people have figured out like what are the different misconfigurations that could happen, because a lot of these misconfigurations, they're things that they're not always bad. Like some of the things that you would do, making an S3 bucket public, there are reasons that people may want to do that. The reasons may not be great, but there are reasons for it. But people have figured out that, hey, we should identify what those things are that people may think are bad and be able to call those out for people. And so there's been a number of tools to be able to do that. And then the other big thing has been integrating all those things together. And so like there's the new buzzword is CNAP, which I work for a vendor that is one of those things. But basically what the concept behind it is to pull in a number of sources of misconfigurations or badness and then be able to correlate those together and provide that insight to people. So I think that's been another thing, because cloud went through some of that same progression that other tools did, where you started off like just trying to make as many findings as possible for people. Like a lot of the early tools were like, hey, we're not a good tool unless we can show you a million findings. And more recently, that's been pulled back to be able to say, you know what, like, people can't deal with a million findings. Like that, if you give somebody a list of a million, you have to prioritize that list in some way. And so that's what's happened, I think, as well, is helping people better prioritize that.
Yeah, you said a few things I wanted to highlight real quick before I kick it over to Nikki, is like the highlight of prioritization. That's kind of a broader topic beyond just cloud. In vulnerability management and software security, is we're seeing this push to, like, it's great that you can identify in 7,000 CVEs and show it to your developers and engineers, but where do they start? They have limited time and resources. Yep. Everything is not equally as critical or concerning from a business perspective. So definitely a valid point there. And then the other thing you brought up that I wanted to highlight is you brought up, like, this shift to kind of having secure by default buckets, for example. We saw a lot of cloud incidents and data breaches because of that. And now we've seen kind of an evangelism from sources like CISO, for example, on secure by default, secure by design systems. And this, of course, is broader than cloud too. But it did take us, I don't know, a decade to get to a secure by default, S3 bucket. And now we've seen some cloud providers, kind of call for a modernization of the cloud shared responsibility model to kind of a shared fate model.
Yep.
I know I'll dive into some of this with you later, but what are your thoughts about how we balance that, like, innovative capability for developers and engineers to do what they need to do and have this kind of loose, free-flowing environment, but also have these secure defaults in place to kind of mitigate some of the common missteps?
Yeah. So I guess like a couple things there. Like one thing that's become a strategy people are using more is like this paved road strategy, this concept of having those secure by defaults, of realizing, like, okay, in the cloud you can do anything essentially. There's so many different capabilities. As I mentioned, there's 200 plus services there, and each of those individual services can be modified, configured in different ways to accomplish different goals. And so there's been this concept of paved roads in order to give people these abstraction layers to be able to say, okay, when you want to create a storage mechanism for backups, or when you want to create that storage mechanisms for a CDN type purpose, like, to be able to give people the building blocks that are going to be secure by default in those ways. And so that's been like one of the, I guess, advancements that's happened there.
Yeah, I was thrilled when we were going to have this conversation around cloud security, because I've been looking into and, dealing with a lot of multi-cloud environments, right? There's a big push for people to use multiple cloud environments, and for lots of reasons, right? One might be, hey, this is my production environment. The other might be, hey, this is long-term storage. I'm just using this to keep my data separate so that, in case something happens here, I at least have my data. I can bring that back up. So I'm curious, because of the inherent complexity around building multi-cloud environments, and you're not typically keeping them separate. There's usually some connectivity between the both. Where do you think organizations should start when they're looking at, if they're looking at moving to a multiple cloud solution or multiple providers, especially around security?
So I generally advise people don't to do that. So a couple different reasons for that. One of them is, for example, myself, I only focus on AWS security. I am not smart enough to be able to follow all of the other cloud providers. And I think that, as I mentioned, like 200 plus services, I think nowadays there's like 10,000 plus APIs that exist on AWS. Like that is, I can't keep up with it. And now if you want to try to double that or triple that by, having those multiple clouds, like it's very difficult to be able to do. And so I liken it a lot to, the different cloud providers they don't really have, they have some functionality that is in common between all of them, but you're not able to take advantage of the cloud providers if that's all you do. If all you're doing is trying to take advantage of the functionality that exists the exact same way amongst all the cloud providers, then you're using the least common denominator of capabilities. And so, different cloud providers are better at different things. And if you really want to use them at their maximum capability, then you want to be able to take advantage of those additional features. I liken it in some ways to, like, a motorcycle and a truck are each vehicles. They'll each get you to like a place, but you shouldn't consider those to be the same things. Like each of those are going to be better at different things. And so you have kind of the same concept with the different cloud providers there. So that's one aspect of things. The other aspect is trying to know how to use them and be able, being able to hire people that know both, multiple cloud providers. That creates complexity as well. And then finally, you have a concept called data gravity, which is that it is difficult to move, or costly and slow to be able to move data between different cloud providers. Once you have data in one place, if that data is terabytes, petabytes of information, and you want to try and access it from another cloud that's in another geographic location, like the speed of light does have a limit, and when you have enough data involved, like it is actually like a problem for you. And more so than that, the different, AWS in particular is kind of known for charging for having your data move out of that cloud provider. And so if you do want to try and copy your data from AWS to other clouds in some way, and I think that this kind of concept is true for the other cloud providers as well, is that that's going to cost you additional money to try and do that. So it is to your disadvantage in a number of ways to use multiple clouds. There are benefits though, like there's resiliency concepts, like what if, worst case scenario, one of the cloud providers just goes bankrupt or decides that like, hey, we don't think that this is financially beneficial for us to continue with this business unit anymore. Let's just shut it down. Or, there's different concepts there that could potentially happen. Or, what if worst case scenario, there is some horrible breach of one of these cloud providers and you want to try and get out of there in some way. So there's benefits to going multi-cloud, but I generally view it as being a very difficult and expensive thing to try and do.
Yeah, just a couple of quick comments there, because I think you pointed out some really interesting and important things. One is the people aspect, right? We're humans. We can only learn so much and retain so much information and manage so much at one time, right? So the point you made about having the right skill set, hiring the right people, are you going to have two separate teams that are managing two separate cloud environments that are experts in one or the other, and then how do you maintain the environment from there? So I think the people aspect is really interesting too, because if you just have one cloud engineer and you're like, hey, by the way, I need you to manage AWS and Azure, go. That's not realistic. It's, that's really tough for anyone. And then the other piece I wanted to mention, because we run into this in vulnerability management a lot when you're using tools, is that you're not, for the most part, leveraging the amount of capability that you could using one tool, right? You're like, oh, let me look for another tool because I might be able to, leverage some of their capability, instead of looking at what you've got and saying, oh, actually, we're only using this to 10, 20, 30% of what it's actually capable of. Let me spend some more time and maybe hire some more skill set to dig deeper into that.
Yep.
Yeah, you said a few points like I was going to highlight, like Nikki, is it's funny that you said you typically recommend not doing that, because organizations, enterprises, businesses are obviously taking a different route, at their own peril, of course. And I've, tried to, balance that dichotomy of being an AWS expert is me, but also venturing into Azure and getting certified in that. And it's hard to keep up with both. Each of them are, in their own right, are a massive ecosystem of capabilities and configurations and tooling and knowledge and expertise. And then you also, talked about some of the considerations though around fault tolerance and disaster recovery and resiliency and security. And that made me want to talk to you about my next topic here. Is you recently contributed to an Atlantic Council report that talked about kind of the systemic risks of cloud, especially in areas like critical infrastructure and national security systems. And we've even heard, leaders from like the Office of the National Cyber Director use phrases calling cloud service providers, especially like the hyperscale IaaS providers, too big to fail. Like they're like these financial institutions that all of society now depends on. What are your thoughts around the systemic risks, that you touched on in that report around critical infrastructure, national security, and our dependency on cloud service providers of every aspect of our society now?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing that I'll say here is a lot of times this conversation will move towards people being hesitant about the cloud in some way, whether it is that resiliency aspect, whether it is, some concerns about security in different ways due to, some cross-tenant incidents that have happened with researchers, identifying various vulnerabilities in some ways. So this conversation can start moving towards people, getting scared, wanting to, not use the cloud. And I am an extreme advocate of using the cloud, for a variety of reasons. One being, that my, my whole career, depends on it, essentially. But it's also, I'm a very strong advocate because, I believe that there are, financial reasons to use the cloud, being able to move faster, being able to use more capabilities. Like I believe it makes your life easier in so many ways. So I want to say first, like no matter what else we say in this conversation, like please don't take away like an idea that you should not use the cloud in some way. All that said, yeah, I mean, at this point in time, there's pretty much like a big 3 cloud providers, that have most of the business. One of the cloud providers in particular, depending on what stats you look at, potentially has over 50% of the business. And so this is concerning from a number of people, and from government perspectives of monopoly power and things like that, in addition to that resiliency aspect of like what happens if there are problems, because it's one thing if there's for some types of things, physical things in the world, if there's one company that is your sole source of tires or whatever it happens to be, something like that, like you can stockpile them, maybe you can get ready for those situations. But when it comes to the cloud, like the cloud is continuously running. Like if the cloud hiccups for a day, like that shuts down the whole economy. Like if a factory shuts down for a day, like okay, that's maybe going to cause some ultimate supply chain issues in some sort, and maybe things become more expensive down the road for a while, before some of that, the supply chain can catch up a little bit. But if the cloud shuts down for a day, like our economy ends. Like it's going to be really bad. So yeah, there is that resiliency aspect. And so I worked on this report with the Atlantic Council, and with that report, they were really focused on the resiliency aspect. And because this was going to a number of people, I also wanted to throw in like the security aspect of ensuring that they are ensuring that cross-tenant vulnerabilities are going to be mitigated, because we have seen some researchers find some of those issues. And then more recently with the Microsoft key incident that has happened here, we saw that nation states are going after these cloud providers in order to be able to access different tenants or different customers at those providers. So in that case, I say cloud provider, but in that case it is going after emails of different customers, but it's still like conceptually very similar.
Yeah, you touched on a couple of critical things to highlight there. Is like, we've kind of reached this critical dependence on cloud, and we look at like things like supply chain security. These hyperscale cloud service providers are now critical aspects of the software supply chain, and there's so many systems and organizations running on top of them. But I also want to emphasize what you said is I really try to push back on the fear, uncertainty, and doubt that sometimes people will try to, use a cloud security incident as like, well, it can't be trusted. It's like, are we really going to go back to the on-premise data center, legacy caveman days? I don't think so.
Yep.
Genie's out of the bottle. We're not going back. And not only that, but I'm sure you agree, from a security perspective, there's a lot of innovative and like promising capabilities we can take advantage of from cloud for security that we never even had access to.
Exactly.
In terms of vulnerability management and resiliency and fault tolerance and programmatic, infrastructure as code, and just so many different things that it provides that you cannot possibly replicate on premise. So I'm with you on that. I did want to bring up, we know that, obviously in Gartner and other groups have predicted this and talked about this, but like 99% or 95%, whatever it is, of cloud security incidents are tied to customer misconfigurations. And we talked about that with like insecure defaults or complex environments and a workforce struggle and things like that. But we have seen some pretty notable incidents recently with the cloud service provider having kind of, egg on their face on their end for an incident and being compromised. And it will happen to everyone, of course, but do you think these incidents start to kind of call into question the trust or trust that we place in these mega cloud providers? And then how do we, go about kind of, assuring leaders that, hey, it's okay. Like cloud is not a threat necessarily, but you have to use it properly. I try to make sure I push back against that when there's a big incident,
Yeah. So I mean, I view it kind of, similar to if you're going to build a physical structure in some way, you want to make sure that you have the best foundation possible. You don't want to build it on, some type of swamp land or anything like that. Like, you want to make sure that you have a solid rock foundation that you're going to be able to build, like, a skyscraper or whatever it happens to be on top of. And so we place a lot of importance on ensuring that these cloud providers are securing things at the best level possible. Like, for a number of companies, there may be a level of security that is acceptable to them, for their own security, but they are still going to want the cloud provider to have that next level of security. They have to be doing security at the absolute best level possible in the world. So that I think is what's important, is making sure that, that is as good as it can be. But, we're still also learning about, like, how I guess we deal with if there are any incidents. This most recent one that's happened, like, what is the right way of dealing with that, especially, when there are, in this case, nation state factors involved. And so therefore, you may not want to be entirely transparent about what and, but at the same time, customers want to know, like, what happened there. And so there's a number of, like, issues that still, I think, need to be resolved and dealt with, by I guess government folks and how they think about those types of things.
Yeah, just real quick comment, Nikki. I was going to say that the big thing that jumps out to me that you talked about right there is, like, just the cloud service providers being transparent with the situation that occurred, what was impacted, what's being done to remediate it, because that lack of transparency, kind of it really doubles down on calling trust into question, and it can make things worse. So I think leading with transparency is definitely a great way for these providers to go.
Yeah.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on shifting gears just a little bit, back to sort of, we're talking about misconfiguration, right? Like, there's a number of different ways that cloud accounts could be misconfigured or misconfigurations could occur, whether that's at the server level, container level, in the actual application, the coding itself. But I think one of my biggest concerns I'm always looking at is identity and access management. And I think part of that is because until recently, it's been really difficult to figure out, are your policies in place? How can you actually get, like, there's no CVE IDs for IAM, right?
Yep.
So, but there are some tools I know that have come out recently that sort of help to identify, like, hey, this user is over permissioned, things like that. So what are based on your experience, what do you think are some of the biggest challenges around IAM, and how we can sort of start to address those, or maybe, secure by default?
So there's some aspects of it that, like, are things that the cloud providers would ideally do a little bit more with, to make some of these things easier for people. Again, like, my whole knowledge is based on AWS. And so, I'll call them out as an example where you can set your policies to be very specific in terms of what resources something, a service needs to have access to. But identifying from your logs, from what I guess features AWS provides to you, it's difficult to try to restrict your policies down to that level of granularity. So there's some improvements that the cloud providers could potentially make there. They have some functionality to help you identify what are the actions that are currently used, or what are the services that are currently used, but they don't let you really identify what are the resources that are being accessed there. So that's one aspect, that some things could be improved there. But more generally, like, one of the problems is just that what is a bad, permissions for one person may not be a bad permissions for somebody else. You have certain tools, for example, in your, CI/CD pipeline that are deploying things into your environment, that probably needs, like, full admin access because it needs to deploy whatever, exists in your environment. And then you have, the other problem where you want to make sure that, for example, if you're granting the ability to access certain S3 buckets, like, something that can read from an S3 bucket that has PII information in it, other, sensitive, your crown jewels, things like that. Like, even if you super narrowly scope the permissions for that one service, it's difficult to identify that service is, like, greater risk than some of your other services that may have a whole bunch of permissions, but they don't have access to that one critical S3 bucket. And so this also pulls in, like, the question of needing to make sure that you understand where your sensitive resources are and like what the threats are that you want to worry about. Knowing that, okay, somebody reading that data, that's very bad. Somebody writing to that data, that's potentially even worse for you. But knowing where that data is a big problem that's associated with the identity space as well. Those two things are like very intertwined with one another.
Yeah, that is great. That's great advice. I have to ask you, this is an easy one, but I have to ask you because I love when we talk to security researchers and we're always talking about statistics, right? And I know you do a lot of great research and writing. So do you have a favorite cloud security statistic and why?
So maybe not like a statistic specifically, and I have to look up what this one is, but basically the number of APIs on AWS grows linearly every single year. So basically the same number of APIs, pretty much roughly speaking, like every single year. Like and if you look at the graph and you overlay them, for each year, like it is so I guess like standard, or not standard is the right word, but like regular. Like there's not like spikes or anything like that, such that like if suddenly like I fell through a wormhole and like it took me to a different time, like a few months or years, like in the future or into the past, and you told me how many APIs existed on AWS, I'd be able to tell you what the date is today. Like it's almost like that level. It's ridiculous. It's just very interesting to me that it hasn't grown like exponentially. It's still remained that linear progression, but it's also like, understand, it is a progression. Like it is constantly increasing. And so like a number of years ago, I actually like identified basically to be able to say, like, if you had learned everything there was to learn about AWS a year ago, and so this is a statistic from a while back, but I said, like, at this point in time, by this point in time now, you only know half of AWS. It has doubled in size, just in terms of like looking at the number of APIs that exist. And that's not even considering the additional functionality that has been added to individual APIs, because they have like additional parameters added and like additional features and stuff like that. So, that is just kind of an interesting thing to me, is, just that like very linear progression that has happened there.
Yeah, that is fascinating. It is one of those things I love to follow too, right? To see like how, because API security is one of those things that keeps me up at night. That really is one of those things that I'm like, oh, I'm worried about that. Well, that takes me actually back perfectly to my last question for you before I turn you back to Chris, which is, sort of going back to that people aspect, right? Like, you can learn so much about AWS or one technology, and we talk about this all the time in security. Things change so quickly. You have to have some resources and references and be reading books and articles and, to be able to keep up. So do you have any training references, any skills people should be looking into to sort of hone in the cloud space?
So I mean, I put out like a number of resources, that flaws.cloud, for that training aspect. But I think more, maybe more important than that, is to understand like what you should be trying to learn. So for me personally, I had made the decision that I was only going to learn AWS security. And so that decision worked out very well for me. That a lot of other people may not be in that position where they can focus on only one cloud, due to their jobs and what their roles require. They may need to have to focus on additional clouds. They may need to have to focus on a number of things. But I think doing as much as you can to try to narrow in on specific concepts, things that you want to try to learn, be an expert in. Like I filter out a lot of things. Like I basically, have just decided I can't learn everything. I can't try and do everything, and you see this today with, a lot of people, they're not going to learn how to, change their oil in their car, or like various other things. Like you start to specialize, you start to, push back on all of this information in the world. And yes, those things are interesting. And yes, I would love to learn about all those other things in the world, but like, I'm going to try to focus in on certain things. I view it as like information is like fractal. Like if you look at those fractal patterns where, you're able to see this pattern and then you zoom in and you realize that pattern is even more complex, and you zoom in and you realize it's still even more complex, and you just keep doing that. Like that is all of information. Like as there is no expert on science in the world. There is no expert on computer science in the world. Like, those things are too broad. Even as you start moving to computer security, like still not really an expert that you could say is an expert on all things computer security. Moving down to cloud security, still not really an expert there. Like you have to zoom in and focus so much on these different things. And I try to give this advice to people that are trying to advance in their careers in some way, or younger in their careers, is to try to focus in on different things. There's that concept of, if you want to become an expert on things, like you have to spend like 10,000 hours on it. And I am of the view that you can cheat by identifying a very specific niche that you want to become that expert in. And so, to try and push back on those things. But again, going back to your original question about like, some of the training and things like that exists out there. I think we've gotten a lot better. I think also, I'm extremely biased here, but the Conference Forward CloudSec puts out a lot of great material and content that people can read and learn in order to learn about cloud security as well.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of appreciation in the comments here from the audience on you pointing out that you can't know all the things. And like even someone who spent nearly a decade on AWS alone is acknowledging like, hey, I don't know everything about AWS, and it's so complex that no single person could. And, I think there's something to be said about the more you become quote unquote expert on something, the more you realize like you don't know.
Exactly.
The further I dive into topics like software supply chain or anything, I'm like, it just keeps going. And like, there's always more to learn. And then I wanted to give a shout out to the generalists out there. There's something to be said about knowing a lot, a little bit about a lot of different things, because then you can kind of converse with a lot of different stakeholders or entities that you interact with. And I kind of try to do that a little bit to some extent too.
Definitely. And you can pull from that expertise as well. Yeah. Like, you have, some people that may have like very deep expertise in one thing, and they may not realize, as an example for cloud security things, like there's a tool called JQ, which is phenomenal for being able to search through JSON data. It's basically like grep, basically made for JSON data. And so you could be an expert on cloud security, and that's, knowing JQ is not really like a concept of cloud security, but if you know JQ as well, like you are going to be able to do so much more, so much faster. And you have those similar like correlations amongst other areas as well. Once you know one area very deeply, but like a little bit about another thing, you can start pulling concepts from that other thing, or you could start pulling the tools and capabilities of that other thing and apply them, to your area.
Yeah, I wanted to make a note. We talked about the workforce a good bit in this conversation. I think that there's something to be said for people coming from other career fields to cyber, because they tend to look at things a little differently, and they think, oh, and then we think, oh, we never looked at it like that, or we never thought of it like that. And it makes perfect sense when you kind of, align it with another domain or something like that. So there's a lot of parallels that can be pulled for sure. Taking us to our last couple of questions with you here today, you talked about Forward CloudSec, and I've been following that organization, that event. I follow the playlist every year when it comes out. I sit there and, I'm riding around in my car, working out, listening to the discussions and trying to take away nuggets of knowledge from them. How did it come about? How has it grown, and what's the future look like for that?
So it came about 2019. A number of us folks had attended the very first Reinforce, which is AWS's conference, their very first conference AWS did that was entirely focused on just AWS security. And so we attended that, and there was some great content there, but we felt that there were some things that were missing from that conference. It was a conference that was made by AWS for AWS, which means kind of like two things. One of the things is they're not going to talk about any other clouds. And as has been mentioned here, like a lot of people are multi-cloud, for better or worse, they are running on multiple cloud providers. And so what changes when you're running on multiple cloud providers? Like what are the best security practices or, concepts, things that you can do when you are running on multiple cloud providers? So that was one aspect of things. And then the other aspect was, if you're giving a presentation, if you have created a conference about your own company, about your own products at your company, you are going to market those, those products. You're going to say what's great about them. You're going to tell everybody that, if you use our product, that, all your problems in the world will go away, and there's no, limitations or any other considerations that you should have. And so we wanted to make sure that we had an opportunity to talk about what are those limitations, what are the things, that but that that you may want to know if you are using some of these different features. So those were a lot of the concepts that we decided, hey, we want something where we can talk about these things. And so we evaluated, like, hey, maybe we should try and talk to some existing conferences in order to have our own track, or maybe we could just get by making sure that we give presentations about these things at some existing conferences. But ultimately we decided, I think there is enough here that we could have our own conference. And so you know I think that some things we were super lucky about and got right from the very beginning. And one of those things being, like, we wanted to have it be a very community focused conference, have it be something that is, like, to our detriment, trying to help everybody in the world. Like, I say to our detriment, but, like, we would rather have things be more difficult for us, have things, that if we were a for-profit business, we would not do, so things like, we live stream all of the talks because we recognize that, like, not everybody in the world is in a financial situation or in the situation where they have the time to travel to our conference. So we make sure that these talks are all live streamed, that they are put up on YouTube as quickly as possible, in addition to that live stream. And then also that we make, like, the tickets as inexpensive as possible for people to be able to attend. You've probably seen that there has been a number of conferences that are very expensive nowadays to attend. Like, in addition to your flight and hotel, or whatever your accommodations are going to be in order to get there, you also have these ticket prices that are very large. And it's frustrating to a number of, people that even work at big companies. They can't even get discounts for some of these, like, conferences, that are run by, vendors that they use. And they're like, really, you're going to charge me $1,000+ even though I'm spending like $1 million+ like on your conference or on your product every year. So that I think is all those different concepts. We decided to make it, like, as accessible as possible to people, and just really tried to make it like the conference that we wanted. We tried to identify, like, what are the things that we found are missing, what are the things that we ideally would want to have at a conference, and let's just do that. Like, let's focus on that. Let's not try to make money. We're a nonprofit organization, and so we basically just try to do the thing that we want to exist in the world. And I think a lot of other people also wanted that to happen. And so I think it's done very well because of that.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I'm a big fan of the event. I follow it. I've never physically attended it quite yet, but I've always listened to the playlist when it comes out. If I can catch a live talk, I do. If I can't, I'll watch the stream afterwards that you put out. And it is really a grassroots community effort. It's affordable. It's available for folks. And we talk about the workforce and needing to fix the workforce. And I mean, what better way to provide something like this to the community and help people learn and develop their skills around cloud security? So for folks interested, that's /CloudSec, FWD, cloudsec.org. The last question I wanted to ask you, Scott, is you've had a variety of roles in the industry, even working on your own for some time, I think, as a consultant, and now you're with an organization known as Wiz. I'm sure many folks know them, a unicorn company with a lot of market presence, and putting out some great research lately on cloud security incidents and data breaches and things like that. Tell us a little bit about Wiz and what they're up to and where people can learn some more.
Yeah, so Wiz is a cloud security company. So we provide a product for people to, this kind of goes back to what I was saying earlier about things that I think are going well. Like, we make a product that I think does these things well, which is to pull in a number of data sources. So look at, the vulnerabilities that exist in your environment, the privileges that are associated with the different identities in the environment, identify where, different sensitive data is in your environment, pull all those things together to give you these prioritized listings of findings in your environment about what is things you should look at, things that are potentially bad, these toxic combinations of things. So that is like what Wiz does. And then I guess more specifically what I'm doing there is I'm on the threat research team. So I am one of the people that is writing some of those blog posts, that is trying to identify what are the misconfigurations and other things that people should be aware of, and building those into the product, and then also writing those blog posts as well. Like I have a blog post that hopefully should be coming out today, that is about also getting some of these issues fixed. So in addition to just writing detections for these things, recently, I worked with a number of different companies in order to eradicate one of these misconfigurations. I say I did these things. I don't know how much I actually did them versus how much was already happening behind the scenes of the different cloud providers. But that's also something that I'm lucky enough to be able to do, is to not only try to build detections into our own product to help only our customers, but also do some of these things to help all people. And that's been something that's really been true of my career in general in cloud security, is like always trying to identify what can I do to make life better for everybody that's trying to use the cloud in different ways. And Wiz is really on board with that same concept as well.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Not just the information sharing, but really trying to get these things fixed, right? I think that's amazing. So I will say thank you for all that you do, because it's great. It is great work with the conference, with your research and the blogs and everything. So thank you for all that. I feel like we could probably talk to you for hours. I think easily we probably could have 20 more questions for you, but I wanted to say a huge thank you for coming on with us today, for talking to us about all things cloud. We talked about skill set, workforce, everything in between. So thank you so much for coming on. That's going to take us out for this week, and we'll see everybody next Friday. Thank you.
Thank you.